Kim and I work together in the National Oratory Fellows, so I'm really excited to have a friendly face. Has
I,
anybody else taken a
Victoria,
workshop with
I don't
me
want to
in the
interrupt
group?
you, but my students were asking today, like, when is Victoria going to be back with us? We miss Victoria, so I'll have to
Let's get
tell.
it on the calendar. Amazing, amazing. I'm so excited. Is anybody else? I can't recall because I know some of you have been in other workshops, but have any of you been in workshops with me before? Okay. So I guess I'll just go ahead and introduce myself and get started. So, my name is Victoria Reinsel. I am a master teaching artist at Ford's Theater, and I am very excited to come in and work with you all today. I'm going to pop an abridged and annotated version of our House Divided speech in the chat. I'm also going to go ahead and get my screen share going so we can take a look at these slides together. um, for those of you who don't know me, which is most of you in this group, I am not going to be just like lecturing at you today. This is going to be very participatory. So I encourage you when I ask questions or I'm looking for participation to please unmute yourself, raise your hand, whatever. I may not even see raised hands. So feel free to just unmute yourself and hop on in. Thumbs up if you can see my screen, if everything's up and loaded for you. Fantastic. Beautiful. Okay. So we're going to take a look today at Lincoln's House Divided speech and start to dig into a little bit in terms of close reading and paraphrasing. We're going to talk a little bit about a technique that we use at Ford's for bringing a text to life. We call this the actor's approach. And then we'll reflect and just find out how you're going to use these tools and techniques in your classroom. I will also share with you all a document I have with some links to resources that we have that also includes this House Divided speech, the abridged and annotated version that we're going to use today in it. So you'll get that at the end as well. Okay, so jumping right on in to close reading. I am sure all of you have introduced your students to something, some kind of primary text that requires a little bit of background before you start to read and discuss it. So, what I like to do is I get the kiddos started with any kind of historical or biographical context that they might need. What is going to be most helpful to them to understand what is happening at this moment in time? If you're using a speech or a piece of writing, what is kind of going through the author's or the speaker's mind? What are the issues that they're addressing? If it's relevant, what's happening in their life? And then I kind of play around with doing some read throughs. I sometimes will start students with a silent read. It's going to depend a little bit on age level and abilities. You, as the teacher, can read that aloud so that they start to hear some fluency and tone with that. And then I like to have them read it aloud. At Ford's Theater, we're really big into oratory, which is the art of public speaking. And I feel like the more we can get kids to speak in class, the better they are going to be as communicators, the more confident they're going to become in themselves and in sharing their opinions, their thoughts with others. And I know for a lot of our kiddos, that's something that they really struggle with, right? They don't feel comfortable expressing their opinions and their thoughts in class. And so we want to really encourage them to be doing this as frequently as possible and kind of just get into the habit of talking. So I'm going to share with you kind of a close reading process that I use. We're going to delve into paraphrasing a little bit, which I think is a great support for the close reading process. And then we're just going to really quickly dive into playing around with performance a little bit, taking a speech and bringing it to life. So, as I've mentioned, I love to look at if it's helpful, if it's relevant to look at an author's or speaker's perspective and biases. I think we all have a pretty good understanding of where Lincoln's coming from. So I'm not going to spend too much time as if he's some unfamiliar figure that we don't really know. But I am going to go a little bit into the historical context for the House Divided speech, kind of what's happening in the immediate time frame before and after that's going to help us really understand it better. We'll chat a little bit about the intended audience and the purpose, and we'll connect it into historical events and themes a little bit too. So, really, really brief, nutshelled overview of what is happening before. And I have a feeling all of you know this. So I'm going to open this up if any of you want to add in comments or thoughts, or because I'm not a historian. I am a trained actor. I'm a literary specialist. I look at texts from that way. And I do have experience with history, but I do not consider myself a historian. So you all probably have a better idea of this stuff than I do. But so this speech is given on June 16th of 1858. So in the years leading up to it, we've got a lot of tension in the country. We've got 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act is passed by Congress, sponsored by Stephen Douglas, who's going to be coming up a lot in this discussion today. It repealed the Missouri Compromise, which was eventually ruled unconstitutional in 1857 with the Dred Scott decision. And this Kansas Nebraska Act leads to something that we refer to today as Bleeding Kansas. And really, this is in many ways a precursor to the Civil War. And I think for a lot of people, the tensions that were happening were getting quite nerve wracking, producing a lot of anxiety for people, right? What's going to happen? We can look at history with this 2020 lens, right? We know what happened, but when you're living it, and I think all of us have this experience having just gone through this historic pandemic, right? We don't know how things are going to turn out when we're living through it, right? That uncertainty is there. So I think for your kiddos, that might be something that can help them relate to this sense of uncertainty, right? Dred Scott decision is something again that's on Lincoln's mind. The idea that Black Americans aren't citizens and no children of slaves will ever be citizens. And I think for Lincoln, he is vehemently opposed to both of these things. He is really thinking that there is this conspiracy to spread slavery, and he does not want his Republican Party to compromise at all by working with Stephen Douglas, who is a Democrat, or really any other Democrats who were going to be in that sort of pro-slavery faction. The during and after of this speech. So I already gave you the date, June 16th, 1858. This takes place at the Illinois State Republican Convention in Springfield, Illinois. This is where they name Lincoln as the Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate seat for Illinois. This is unusual. It's early and it's public. So I'm curious for you all why that might be important to you. If you're in the audience, if you're looking at this, why are they making this move to announce the candidacy early like this and in such a public fashion, especially when Lincoln is seen as a bit of a radical? Any thoughts or reactions to that before we continue forward? Feel free to just unmute yourself if you would like to contribute anything. For me, it kind of resonated that it was early in public. It was like, we have to have a show of strength, right? We have to decide where we are, take a stand, and move forward, and do it in a really public way that's going to draw this attention to what's happening in the country and what is so important here. So for me, that was a really interesting move, right? To gauge people's reaction. Yes, absolutely. Feel free to put stuff in the chat too if you want. I'll try to kind of keep an eye on that as we go through. Yeah. Where are things going to gauge that reaction? So we know that not too long after this speech, Lincoln and Stephen Douglas have a set of 7 debates that are going to be really important to like lay out where both of them stand with this, since they're both running, of course, for this same Senate seat. And we all know, I'm sure, that Lincoln loses to Douglas, but that he ends up beating Douglas for the presidency later. And that only, I think, happened because the Democratic Party at that time was so fractured. So it's really interesting that Lincoln is sort of as we'll see in the speech, calling for unity within the Republican Party, right? And keeping ourselves focused and together. And it ultimately didn't pay off for the Senate seat, but it paid off for the presidency. Okay. So as we look at this speech, I want you all to be thinking about how's the speech structured. We're going to go through, see if there's any unfamiliar words or allusions to things that we want to look up, see if there's any other important rhetorical devices, any repetition. Antithesis is one of my favorites, things that are in opposition or contrasts. Any kinds of metaphors or figurative language we want to note. And I often task students, if I've already introduced some of these terms, I'll often task them with like flagging them, like who can find them first, right? And turn it into a little bit of a game. So it's playful, right? I love to just keep asking questions as we work through the text. So I'm going to be doing that with you today. So please feel free to unmute yourself, to pop things into the comments whenever you'd like. Make it as interactive as possible so I don't have to just keep talking to myself the whole time. Okay, so we've already talked through some of the historical biographical stuff. I'm going to skip over all these read through parts for right now. As we're doing this though, because I'm actually going to be asking you all to do a little bit of a read. As we go, we can stop and talk about if there's any questions or definitions. Then we're going to move into paraphrase, and then we're going to play with performance a little bit. All right. So I think I've got 5 or 6 slides. So I would love some different volunteers. Who'd like to read this first slide? This is our abridged version. Who wants to play?
All right. Mr. President, gentlemen of the convention, if we could just know where we are and whither we appear to be tending, we could all better judge of what to do and how to do it. We are now well into our 5th year since a policy was initiated with the avowed object and confident purpose of putting an end to slavery agitation.
Awesome. Are there any questions that we have about any of this text before we move on to the next portion of the speech? Any words that were unfamiliar? Any rhetorical devices that we see? Anything we want to address? Feel free to pop stuff in the chat. What do we think is this policy that he's referring to, that he's alluding to here? You all are historians. Help me out here. Let's go back a couple of slides. What's happening? Oh, everybody's so quiet today. Yeah, Missouri Compromise. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, so we have this idea of, free states versus slave states. How is this all going to work out, right? Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to our second slide. Who can help me read this?
I will. However, under the operation of that policy, the agitation has not only not ceased, but has constantly augmented. In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So let's take a look at this text. What is Lincoln alluding to when he has this quote, right? Because we see there's quotations here. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Where is he getting that quote from? Any ideas? Any thoughts?
I think it's a biblical.
It is. So why do you think Lincoln is quoting the Bible here? Let's think about his audience. Let's think about who he's talking to. It's a moral issue, Kim Ritchie says, bringing in morality. Interesting. How familiar do you think his audience would be with the Bible in general? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Many of them are Christians. These are Bible Belt people. Absolutely. Yeah. And this house divided thing comes up in both Mark and Matthew. So it's definitely something that shows up in multiple places. So it's like if you didn't, yeah, it's the most read book of the day. Exactly. Like if you didn't catch it in one place, you were going to catch it in this other, at least, right? Absolutely. They know that text. And most of them are going to be churchgoers. They go, every Sunday they're getting bits of the Bible. So these are things that people would know for sure. So let's talk about this. This seems really simplistic, right? But like for our kiddos, this is something they're going to have to unpack. So the house, is he talking about a literal house? All right. It's obviously figurative language. So what is he actually talking about? What's the metaphor? Yes, metaphorical, absolutely. One of my favorite literary devices. So what is it a metaphor for, this house? The US. Yes, absolutely, says Bobby in the chat. Yeah. So our house, the United States, our nation, our people, if we're divided, we're going to fall. We have to choose which side we're going to go on here, free or slave. It's not going to work if we don't pick that. Okay. So another one of my favorite literary devices in here, antithesis. Has anybody heard that word? Know what that is? Antithesis? No. Okay. So antithesis is things that are held up in contrast to each other. It's a fancy schmancy Greek term. And I always tell my students, it does not matter if you remember the Greek word or not. I just want you to recognize that it's happening. So we can think of antithesis as being straight up opposites, like hot and cold, north and south, right? We can also think of them as things that are held up in contrast. So when he has that first sentence here, however, under the operation of that policy, that agitation has not only not ceased, but has constantly augmented. What is he comparing? What things is he contrasting here? What is the agitation? Let's start there. Y'all are going to have to unmute yourselves, I think. Does the policy keep changing? Good question. Yes. All right, somebody help me out. I feel like I'm swimming around by myself here. I'm brain dead, says Kelly. I get it. The North and the South. Yes. So
Well,
the agitation. Yes, please.
I started saying, it's the discussion of slavery has gone from, okay, it's going to stop at this line to now, are we going to bring a state in? Are we going to allow them to be slave? And so it just kind of keeps building on itself and then changing, just like with the Three-Fifths Compromise and all that.
Yes. Yeah. So that idea of it not ceased, it hasn't stopped, but it's constantly augmented. It's constantly grown, right? So now we're dealing with new territories in the US. We've expanded the country, and we have been in a situation where we're trying to figure out, are these new territories, these new states, going to be free or enslaved, right? And so that's what's the stretch is, right? That idea of like, are the slave states going to get more power, right? More voting power, more everything else. And so that's a tension that's happening economically. So this idea of antithesis is a really helpful one because he uses that in this speech constantly. Everything from like the notions of being free and enslaved to the Democrats and the Republicans. There's a lot of things that he's holding up in contrast here. So that antithesis is going to help a lot. Yes, I love the comment we just got about this augmented. You envision a material solidifying. I love that. There's always like these luscious connotations that we can get from words where we have pictures in our head that like make it come alive in some way to us. So I love that for you. Excellent. All right, next slide. Who wants to read this one? Please and thank you.
I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the House to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest this further spread and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is on a course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates shall press it forward until it shall become alike lawful in all of the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. Have we no tendency to this latter condition?
Awesome. Thank you so much for reading that. I appreciate it. So we just talked about antithesis. We just talked about opposites, things being held up in contrast to each other. Where do we see that show up in this section of the speech? Pop it in the chat, unmute yourself.
I mean, I feel like he's just basically saying like the goalpost has to quit moving. At some point, it's going to quit moving. We're going to do one, we're going to do the other. But if
Yeah.
we're going to survive this, it's going to have to be, we're all, I hate to be corny, we're all in this together. Like, this is the way we're going.
Yeah. Yeah. What other bits of antithesis do you all see in this? What things is he holding up in contrast? Half slave, half free? Yes.
Well, just like where he's talking about the opponents of slavery, and then, talking about, or are the people going to be satisfied that it is going to go towards extinction? So it's talking about the two groups and their beliefs there too.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So we
Well,
can look at
almost in every
antithesis and
line here we see antithesis because we already talked about half slave, half free, but then he goes on. It's not going to fall, but it's going to be divided. It will become one thing or the other. So there's this really good balance in his sentence structure where he gives one thing and then the other. What's interesting to me is that he uses different punctuation. So sometimes it's one sentence in the next. Sometimes he uses dashes. Sometimes he uses a comma. So it's interesting that he uses different punctuation, but he's keeping the sentence structure basically the same.
yeah. He likes to split things up, sometimes in clauses, sometimes in full sentences. Sometimes, even if you look at some of his speeches, he'll put like one paragraph against another paragraph and kind of contrast those. So if you're looking at structural things, sometimes it's really helpful to see like how he's laying out his argument. And is he putting one thing over here and one thing over here, right? Excellent. Any other observations about antithesis and how this is really important to this particular section of the text?
Sorry, not really an answer to your question, but that was just very interesting. I would have never thought of that with the grammar and the sentence structure. That's just really cool.
Yeah. I love that. I love those reactions. Keep them coming. Yes, he's breaking from his Whig roots. Yes. Yes. I love this as an open-ended question to give to your kids, right? Give them the text and like have them, how many opposites can you find? How many things that are in contrast can you find? And like look for the specific examples in the text. You can even give them like, two different colored highlighters and have them, show the pairs, right? Whatever that is. Okay. So the last rhetorical device that I'm going to toss out to you is in the last sentence of this slide, this rhetorical question. So I know you've all heard of rhetorical questions before. What are they?
Aren't they questions you already know the answer to or have a good idea of what the answer is?
Yep, that sure can be. Do we typically expect the audience to answer us? Yeah, questions that you're not meant to answer out loud. Yeah, questions that don't need to be answered by the audience, questions that make you think, questions for deep thought and reflection. Yes. A pretend question or one we don't want an answer to, or maybe it is one that we do. Maybe it's something that we have to actually provoke our audience into thinking about, right? Do we have no tendency to this latter condition, to being all slaves? Is this not a possibility? Right? Yeah. And you have to get the audience to think, yeah, this actually is. We have the possibility of becoming a fully enslaved country, right? And so you've got to get the audience to think about it. Those scary questions that we have to ask ourselves is like a reality check, right? That's kind of what Lincoln's going for here. It's like, this could actually happen, right? We got to think about that. Do we want this to happen, right? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. It's a short one. Who wants to read it?
I will. Our cause then must be entrusted to and conducted by its own undoubted friends, those whose hands are free and whose hearts are in the work, who do care for the result.
Awesome. Thank you, Rhonda.
Hmm.
All right. So he was doing this in the beginning of the speech, and I didn't really point it out, but I think it's a helpful thing for us to think about. Sometimes pronouns are sort of throwaways, and sometimes the importance of them can really help with our argument and our understanding of it. So he starts out, if I just were to switch over to this first slide here, this first bit of it. We. And then he goes into I for a little bit, what his thoughts are, I. But then he goes back into this our. Right? What's up with that? Why would somebody use that collective? He's not using a royal we, right? It's not like the King of England, we are displeased, right? He's actually using it as we collectively. Why? Yes, to unify everyone and make everyone responsible. Yes.
A
We're
collective
all in
buy-in.
this. Yes. It's a tactic that he keeps using to show that it matters to each of us. Excellent. So it's a tactic he keeps using when he gets into the presidency. It's something that he uses over and over again. This idea of unifying us, that we're all in this together, that we all have skin in the game, right? It's something that's really, really important here. So now he's talking about friends, and he's talking about hearts, and he's talking about caring for the results of how things are going to turn out. What's that about? When you start talking about friends and caring and hearts, what's that about? Talk to me about that.
I think this slide has a distinct difference from the previous, where the antithesis was so present. As I was reading it, even it rushed me through it. The emotion was different. It made it is very urgent, very excitable, not necessarily combative, but there were lines that were drawn. But here he comes back, and this is very soothing. Our cause must be entrusted to our hearts, our friends. So it's kind of the ebb and flow of the speech. We have the rhetorical question, and then he's selling it here at the end, like, this is us. It's all, so it just changed, I feel like, the tone, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Emotions are a really important thing, right? Lincoln is trained as a lawyer. He's very, very good at laying out logical arguments. And if you know anything about Aristotle's three appeals, logos, ethos, and pathos, right? This is something that he had a really strong ability to do, to use all of these appeals to get us. He can lay out a logical argument like nobody's business, and he does. But he also knows that as humans, one of the things that sways us the most are our emotions, right? And so, absolutely, here, he's playing on those emotions. He's like, we are all in it together. We're all friends. We all have to care about this work, right? Our hearts are in it. That's a very different thing than here's the problem, here's what's been going on, here's the solution, here's how to fix it, right? Absolutely. He's playing with our emotions and getting us invested, getting us to care, right? Oh, I care about the result. Maybe I should get involved in this. Yeah. All right. Yes. I love Adam's comment about looking at the words, and this is something that, again, for time's sake, and also because you're adults, I'm not really spending a whole lot of time in, but definitely looking at any of those words that we don't know the meanings of, looking at allusions to historical events, pulling all that stuff apart. So when you're looking at like entrusted, the idea of prefixes and suffixes and roots to discuss word building skills, yes. Context clues to confirm their meanings, absolutely. You can spend a long time pulling apart a single piece of text, as deep divey as you want to get with it. So it's great because you can do kind of a quicker look, or you can go like really hardcore and pull it apart. Love it. Okay. I'm going to move us over to our next slide. Oops, 5. Who can help me with this one? Yes, love that comment, Beth. Use of R makes it feel like a topic that's relevant. Yes. Who can help me reading out this slide, please?
2 years ago, the Republicans of this nation mustered some 1,300,000 strong. We did this under a single impulse of resistance to a common danger with every external circumstance against us. Of strange, discordant, even hostile elements, we gathered from the four winds. We fought the battle through under the constant hot fire of a pampered, proud, disciplined army. Did we brave all then only to falter now? Now, when that same enemy is wavering, deserved, and belligerent, the result is not doubtful.
Thank you so much. All right. This is like one of my favorite parts of this speech. This feels to me like, I don't know if I got any Shakespeare fans in the room, but this feels like, Henry V rallying the troops almost, right? Tell me about your reactions to this section. What are you getting from it? What's resonating with you?
To me, it's his appeal. He's like, listen, we stood strong. We did this. We worked together and got it this far. We can't give up now.
Yes. Yes, the language of conflict, very much a battle cry. I mean, he's literally even using military words here, right? Battle, army, disciplined, right? That's what you think, a disciplined army, right? Rallying the troops, exactly. And our enemy is now wavering, dissevered, and belligerent. I love those words. You have to like slow down to say them, right? He's not using monosyllabic words. He's using wavering, dissevered, and belligerent. What is with those word choices, my friends? Yes, the sentence structure is like a march, Kim. I see that. Yes. What's with those choices? Wavering, dissevered, belligerent. He also calls them pampered and proud, too. Yes. Antonym of common danger, goods, responsibilities. Yes.
It's like the call to action.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this call to action. He's rallying the troops. Exactly. Y'all are right in with it. Okay. I love this idea of gathering from the four winds too, because there's definitely references in the Bible to gathering from the four winds. So it's again, it's an illusion that his audience is going to know. They're going to be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that." So that's another fun little play there that's in this section. All right, we've got one more section to go, and it's a short one. Who can help me out? Take us home.
We shall not fail if we stand firm. We shall not fail. Wise counsels may accelerate or mistakes delay, but sooner or later the victory is sure to come.
Yes. This is, like the final rallying moment, right? He even uses another military word, victory. So what is he saying? Let's just break this down to a simple message. What's his call to action? What does he want his audience to do?
I feel like earlier he was saying it's going to be one thing or the other, but here he's basically saying no, it's just going to be this thing. Like this is where it's going. We're not going to fail. If we do these things, we're on the right course. So whereas before he was giving, well, it's going to have to be one way or the other, whatever it is, and here he's like, but it's going to be this way. Like I don't know. That's kind of how
Yeah, Beth, I think you've pointed out something really interesting here, that he starts out a little, it's a little less intense in the beginning, right? He's like, so here's where, things have been, this is the thing that's been happening. He gives them that little wake up call. Have we no tendency to this latter condition? Right? And nobody knows yet for certain that there's going to be this civil war. But he's already forming this military language, this comparison to this fight to stop the spread of slavery. Yes, even the antithesis is softened in this section. Exactly. Yeah. So it's very interesting to me that he starts out with that, like, here's a recap of where things are going. Maybe here's your reality check. Do we really want this to happen? No, we don't. Okay, then we better work together and then we better fight, right? Absolutely. I love this speech because it is such a firebrand moment for me. Like, this is Lincoln kind of standing out as a bit of a radical at this point. He's like, we can't compromise anymore. We got to pick a side and we got to move forward. And it's really interesting to think about the people in history who have done that, who have taken a stand in some way, even though other people around them might be like, oh, let's just wait and see how it goes, right? Or like, we don't need to put that much effort into it. And I'm sure that we can all think about, and we can get our students to think about, like, who are the people that are willing to take a stand in tough times? Who are the people who are willing to put their necks on the line, right? Okay. So we're going to move into paraphrasing. So I'm sure you all know this, but paraphrasing is putting something into your own words, right? It's different than summarizing. Summarizing is shortening. Both of them have their place. Both of them can be helpful. But I love paraphrasing because we get to really think about the language and really pick it apart. We get to think about those connotations, right? We were talking before about one of the words, I think augmented, right? We had that visceral reaction to it, right? You had a picture in your mind of it. So that's kind of what we're thinking with connotations, right? I like to think about synonyms for words and think about how there's a difference between, like, I'm going to walk down the street, which is fairly neutral, and I'm going to saunter down the street, right? Sauntering has a very different feel to it than just walking, right? There's like an image you get in your mind. So we're going to think about those connotations and not just the denotations or the dictionary definitions. With paraphrasing, I want to remind students that it's not about being better. You're not trying to do a better version than Lincoln's or Shakespeare's or whoever you're paraphrasing, right? That's not what the purpose of it is. It's to investigate word choice, to enhance your understanding, and to appreciate the text more, now that you've been able to really put it into your own words and think about it in a really nitty-gritty, specific way. It's also not about being right. This is not 2 + 2 = 4. There's not just one possible option. There is a creativity in it. And we're also thinking about our own visceral responses to connotations too. So it's not about being right. There are options. Of course, if you're like way out in left field and you really don't know what a word means, right? Then there's an issue there and you want to address that, right? But within the spectrum of options, there is a spectrum. That's the point, right? I also like to, when I'm working with kids on this, like gamify it a little. Make them like an archaeologist, like brushing off the layers of dust to find what's underneath. Or like they're a detective looking for clues in the text, right? Works better with younger kids than it does with high school ones, but you do what you need to do to get them motivated and get them intrigued by it. I think language is so fascinating. I just think that the choice of a person's words, right? You have to think about with Lincoln, like how many times did he think about like the particular word that he was going to end up choosing? Okay. So let's delve into it a little bit. I'm just going to throw some tips at you and then we're going to take a look at a bit of the text. So for me, this is how I handle paraphrasing. I go sentence by sentence, word by word. So we're not skipping anything. I'm thinking about the connotation. I'm thinking about the tone, the emotion of the words. I'm thinking about, is this a more formal or informal situation? Is the syntax, the sentence structure complicated? Lincoln likes a lot of long sentences with multiple clauses, but sometimes he puts in a short sentence to contrast with that. So thinking about that can be helpful. I even like to think about the feel of the words. Like when I'm saying belligerent, I have to really like get my mouth around that. It's not a slippery word. It doesn't just come out. I have to like crunch it a little. Like, so I like to play with that stuff. And that's the actor in me really enjoying language. I do not let kids skip. If you don't know what it means, get a dictionary out, get a thesaurus out. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I encourage it. And the reason I do is because one, I want to make sure that you understand the denotation, the dictionary definition, but I also get out the thesaurus whenever I'm paraphrasing because I might not think of the perfect synonym off the top of my head. I might think of something that's okay and would work. But when I open up that thesaurus, I might see something that's even better, that gets closer to the connotation. So it's not a matter of like knowing or not knowing things. It's a matter of like embracing the tools you have and using them. Certain words I won't bother paraphrasing. I'll just keep them the same. And those are proper nouns, pronouns, articles like a and the, conjunctions, prepositions, those little tiny words, right? Numbers, time, unless you're Hamlet, to be is a verb. You don't have to bother to paraphrase, right? To be or not to be. To have, to do, those are the word, those words often help other things, right? And then adverbs like very and much that kind of intensify or qualify. I'll leave those alone. Really, very, all of that. If you repeat a sentence or you repeat a word in the original text, if Lincoln does that, then you repeat that word in your paraphrase and make sure that it has the same meaning. If he's using a word that has multiple meanings, which sometimes he does that a lot in Gettysburg, right? Then you got to think about, is my paraphrase reflecting the multiple meanings? All right. So before I have you all work on a little bit of paraphrasing, I'm going to share and I would love to discuss with you my paraphrase. Does not mean it's the only one. It does not mean that it's quote unquote right. It's just what I came up with. Okay. And you all would do something different and your students would do something different. But I would love for us to compare what's in the original and what's in the paraphrase and what's standing out for you. So I just chose this little chunk of text. So the original is of strange, and I chunked it up so I wasn't getting tripped by long sentences. I chunked it up by phrases. So of strange, discordant, even hostile elements, I came up with from unfamiliar, clashing, even antagonistic factions. We gathered from the four winds. We came together from the four corners, which is like, again, we're playing up those Bible references. We fought the battle through. We strove the crusade through. I was just playing around with the language. That seemed fun to me, right? Under the constant hot fire, under the perpetual burning flames of a pampered, proud, disciplined army. And I wanted to play with the alliteration, the sound, that repetition of sound with the P's. So I went with of a pretentious, pompous, purposeful force. Did we brave all then, only to falter now? Did we go through all that then, only to flounder now? So I'm literally going like word by word, phrase by phrase, chunking it up. I'm going to give you a little bit of text to play with, but initial responses, initial thoughts on my paraphrase, and any questions you might have of how I was getting to those words or responses to the paraphrase.
No, I just appreciate how you keep the things the same. Like sentence structure for me is a big deal as an English teacher. So I think doing this with my students, I would want them to see that. Like when there's three, like in that first sentence, when there's three things, you got to keep three things. Or if there's alliteration, like we want to try to find ways to keep that alliteration there, because speeches aren't just about the words on the page, they're also about the way they come across when they're read out loud. So I think in paraphrasing, it would be really important for students to read it out loud to see if it sounds the way they want it to sound.
Yes, I love that. Anything else?
Kim and I were just sitting here brainstorming together, and we talked about taking an activity like this for a whole group. And you could either do it
Yeah.
as a class or in small groups, assign a
Mhm.
sentence to each student, and let them paraphrase in their own words, and then come together and see as a group what the speech sounded like. And then you can even then go sentence by sentence and say, okay, which sentence, is easiest to understand, which one lets the reader, I don't know, kind of have that same feeling that the author had. And then it also gives you
Yes.
a chance to find author's voice, because the way I interpret something or the way I'm going to write something or describe it is different. So it allows them to find their voice as an author.
Yeah. Just to respond to what you were saying before about the classroom thing, what I'll often do is like I'll model like a little bit of the text like this, like I'll model a little bit, and then maybe I'll have the whole class work on a sentence or a phrase together and hear from different people's voices. And we can think about like, oh, let's, which synonym of all of these do we like the best as a class, right? And then I'll divide them into smaller groups, like pairs or tiny groups at the tables or whatever. And then I may even have them work on something individually, just so that they have that sense, right? It's really fun as a collaborative exercise, but it also is really interesting to work in like pairs and like whose do you go with? How do you come to that decision, right? And having to maybe even like defend your choice, right? Well, this is why I chose it, right? I find that really interesting, and maybe you can change your partner's mind or something. Who knows, right? But that discussion is a really important part of it. Absolutely. Do you all want to give it a go? I hope so. Okay. So I'm going to give you like 2 minutes. That may be too much, but we'll see. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes. I would love, this is the original text, and then the paraphrase is up to you. So feel free to use like thesaurus.com or whatever you like. You can put your responses into the chat, and I'm curious what we all come up with. So have a couple of minutes. While you're doing that, I'm going to pop in a link for a resource page for you all.
Hey,
I know that some of you are driving, so don't
Hey,
worry. Mhm.
Victoria, I think the access needs to be changed on that
Hmm.
document.
Great, I will take care of that right now. Thank you for pointing that out.
We are
Should work
good.
now.
Yes, we are good to go. And I'm putting it in the chat
Excellent.
right now. Oh, I keep doing
Perfect.
this
Thank you very
direct
much.
message. I'm terrible about that. There we go.
Oh, I may have, sorry about that. I may have sent
Yeah,
it to just you. Thank you
that's
for
all
copying
right.
it and sending it to everyone.
That's all right.
Sometimes my brain at the end of the day is like, what?
Well, I was thinking through about the paraphrasing and stuff and thinking of emojis and the whole bit, like as an exercise of teaching, like encouraging kiddos to think beyond emojis. Like, yes, they do have power in vernacular language and intent, and yet which one works better, like in terms of the
Yeah,
paraphrasing versus
I
the
love
more
that. I think,
cultural slang.
yeah, I think you could also like do a separate exercise where you have kiddos look at the tone of a speech and express it through emojis and go like, does it, is it like neutral here? Is it really happy here? Are we really sad here? Are we, you know, our minds are exploding, that little like, thing, that little emoji. Yes. Yes. Thank you for starting to put these in the chat. Yes. Yes. Beautiful. Loving it. Yes. It's interesting to note if you all are looking at the chat, looking at these different paraphrases, like how many of you are going word by word and how many of you are slightly summarizing, right? Are you actually putting in like a synonym for every word, which is tends to be how I do paraphrasing because I love that specificity. But if you're getting right, it's a sure thing. I love the like modern parlance of that, right? The result is not doubtful. It's a sure thing. Love it, love it. It's still a paraphrase. It's not the word by word, but it is a paraphrase. I love that. Yes, yes. Love all of these. So good. Yes. The end is certain when the enemy is uncertain. Yes. So good. All right. Yes, yes, yes. I love the alliteration, faux, faltering, fractured. Yes, having fun with the language. Yes. So good. Yes, yes. So good. I love it. Y'all are doing great work. Okay. So I know we've only got a couple of minutes left together. Really, really quickly. Once you've gotten an understanding of what the text is, I love to play with bringing it to life. I think performing is a really powerful tool for demonstrating understanding. We have resources on the podium blah, 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 I cannot speak English right now. We have resources on the podium points, which are public speaking 101 things like volume, tone, diction, eye contact, all of those fun things. And those are available on our website. So you can think about applying those. I love to think about this is from an acting perspective. This is what actors do with text. what does the speaker want? I want to really think in like a general term, what does the speaker want? So if I'm Lincoln in this moment, what's a possible objective? What does Lincoln want? We already talked about this a little bit. What does he want his audience to do? Unify. Unify against whom? To come together. Love this. Yeah. Specifically, we Republicans, we need to band together. Yes, against slavery. Exactly. Okay. So the next step, once you've thought about that big objective, that big overarching goal, is to really go I like to go line by line, really. And I think about a tactic. A tactic is a verb that you can do to your audience.
That one.
So,
Thinking.
sorry? I think somebody maybe just unmuted by accident. I'm not sure. Okay, work together for the same outcome. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so then I take a tactic, and it's always this verb. It's always something you can do to the audience, right? You're to inspire, to shame, to educate, to whatever. So when Lincoln says, "Did we brave all then, only to falter now?" What's a tactic he can be doing to them? What's a tactic? Did we brave all then, only to falter now? Give me a verb. What is he trying to do to the audience? To challenge them. Ooh, to motivate them. Yes, awesome. Can I have somebody unmute and say, did we brave all then, only to falter now? Trying to, let's just take one, to rally them. Who wants to rally with that line? Somebody do it.
Did we brave all then only to falter now? Now, when that
Yes.
same enemy is wavering, deserved, and belligerent.
Yes, rocket on. Yes. So I love that. You're injecting it with energy. Okay. So I will not ask you all to stay past the 5 o'clock mark, but if you would like to stay on for a couple of minutes, I would love to hear if you have any questions or reflections on how you plan on using these strategies in your classroom. Yes, and Axel has said to let us know your thoughts on X. Send us I don't know if it's called a tweet anymore, but send us a tweet. And yes, we also have some great PD programs open right now. So please check out those applications. Axel has put the link in our chat. All right, I'm going to open it up. I know many of you will have to go, so no worries if you do. Thank you so much for playing with me today. If you'd like to stick around and ask questions or reflect, I'm here.
Oh, that was good, good, good. And I put it on there at the end, Rhonda. And I put the evaluation link in the bottom of the chat. And let's make certain that we definitely support our friends over at Ford's Theater with taking that specific feedback of what you really took away. For me, I'm thinking of so much as a historian here of Lincoln and what he's bringing to the table, but yet knowing his audience, the tone, the style, and thinking about what you all said. For example, like Kim and Beth and Rhonda, how you all were talking about this use of punctuation, right? Like how often we can miss all of that just trying to drop someone in historical context, that we miss the waves of influence today because we're talking JFK. So many who have read Lincoln and meticulously studied. So we're talking an entire generation, multiple generations influence. So thank you so much, Victoria. I'm going to stick around in case anybody has any questions. I might not have the answer because I am not Wendy, but I can always jot them down and I can get them to Wendy with it. So thank you so much, Victoria, for you and your team.
Thank you. I'm happy to stick around for a couple of minutes too, if anyone has reflections or questions they'd like to share.
So is your office in Ford's Theater? I have to add a question.
Nope, my office is home.